Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. Thank you to our sponsor for today's episode, East Brother Beer. Located on Canal Boulevard in Point Richmond, East Brother Beer mixes classic brewing styles with precision and modern sensibility to create the perfect Bay Area craft beer. Every October for the last 5 years, some of the brightest and most inquisitive minds around gather in Berkeley for Uncharted, the Berkeley Festival of Ideas. This 2-day event, which takes place on October 5th and 6th of this year, is all about introducing you to new ideas and thoughts meant to expand your way of thinking and look at the world in a new or different way. To preview this year's festival, we have the people behind its creation on the podcast today. Helena Brantley, who came onto the podcast last fall to recap the last year's festival, and Lance Knobel, founder of Berkeleyside.com. We also talk about the benefits of opening your mind to ideas you never once thought to consider. So, Helena, Lance, thanks for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate this. Helena, you've actually been on the podcast before in the past. When was that? That was almost a year ago now, right?
About a year ago. It was right after Uncharted last year. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, of course. I've been wanting to get you back and wanting to get Lance also on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So, how have things been since, like for you, Helena, how have things been since the last time we did the podcast?
Busy.
Growing the company?
Growing Red Pencil, but also I think, Lance and I start thinking about Uncharted at the beginning of the year. And so for the better part of the last, 9 months, we've been slacking and meeting and talking and emailing. And so it's been really busy for us both. But Red Pencil is good. I'm happy to report. But I have to tell you, I'm so excited about Uncharted and all the time that we've put into trying to create a space that's going to be different for people to think about some of the big things that are happening right now.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I believe now remembering when we did your podcast, It was just right after Uncharted, I believe. And so we talked about some of the speakers. Mm-hmm. So, Lance, you have a very interesting career leading up to Berkeleyside and Uncharted. So why don't you explain a little bit how you got here? And you've been editor-in-chief for a few magazines.
Yeah, that's right. Most of my career is in journalism, mostly business journalism before we started Berkeleyside, and almost entirely in Europe. I was editor of a magazine called Management Today, which is kind of Britain's equivalent of Fortune magazine. And then I became editor of a magazine called World Link, which was the magazine of the World Economic Forum, which is the Swiss organization that's famous for its annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland. Kind of all the world's high and mighty people go there. And, through my work with the forum on the publishing side, I eventually then also kind of took on the program of that Davos summit meeting. So, I have a lot of experience in kind of organizing big international meetings, talking about business issues, geopolitical issues, that sort of thing. When we started Berkeleyside in 2009, obviously that's a very different thing. It's intensely local in focus. It's not trying to conquer the world, though it's trying to conquer our little world here in the East Bay. But news is an incredibly tough business, as no mystery to anyone. Newspapers are closing all over the country. Journalists are losing their job. There are more and more news deserts, and Berkeleyside is designed as one possible solution to that. But it remains a tough business. And so we looked at how could we diversify our business. And one of the things we focused on was events, both because a lot of media companies do it. The New York Times holds conferences. The Atlantic has developed a very, very successful division called Atlantic Live. Texas Tribune, which was founded almost exactly the same time as Berkeleyside, has this very successful Texas Tribune Fest. And particularly given my background, the Davos thing, other conferences I've organized, it seemed like a natural fit. And when we were thinking about it, what do you associate Berkeley with? You associate Berkeley with ideas, and particularly innovative ideas on the edge. And that's what we really try and do with Uncharted.
So, what made you go from running all these different events and magazines to deciding I want to open up Berkeleyside.com?
Because of the need. My wife and I moved to Berkeley in 2006, I think, from London. And, one of the things that struck us very early on was nobody was telling us what was happening in the city we lived in. And the two of us became friendly with another journalist, Francis Dinkelspiel. And so the three of us are the founders, all of us with a lot of journalism experience. We were living in a city where most of the news was uncovered, and we thought this was something we could do, and that's where it started.
Now, Berkeley is known to have its own unique culture, its own feel and voice to it. How do you capture that, like through a news outlet, and especially online?
We are very focused on the news, and some of the news unquestionably has a Berkeley tinge to it. That sort of popular notion of Berkeley. There's obviously a very progressive politics in Berkeley. There are occasionally, things that happen in Berkeley that, strike people as unusual politically. What we do as a news site, however, actually is not so much fight against, but we don't spend our time promoting the so-called berserkly notion of Berkeley. First of all, I think that's largely unfair. I think it's a fringe thing. I think it's a relic of a different era. Berkeley is a city of 120,000 people. It remains quite a diverse city, although that's being challenged by, the changing house prices, changing economic circumstances. And it has, within its parameters, it has a range of political opinion from, I'd say, left to very left. And that's reflected in its politics. And that's what we focus on. We don't focus so much on, people doing crazy things. Occasionally that might be a news story, but we focus on what I'd call the real news, and that people seem to appreciate that.
That's awesome. Now, at what point did the two of you meet and connect?
Helena might remember the year.
I do. It was the first year of the Bay Area Book Festival, which I believe was 2014. And we met at the gala that they have annually. And I remember it very vividly that Lance and Tracy came up and said, hey, I just heard, a little bit about what you do at Red Pencil, and we have this thing called Uncharted, and we'd love to talk with you. And that's how it started.
So the origins of our working together was, Helena was originally the publicist for Uncharted, and the kind of learning her thought processes, her kind of approach to work, the perspective she brought to that work, it became clear to me, and I think clear to you as well, that there'd be an opportunity to make a deeper work connection by becoming co-curators, which started last year.
Right.
Great. So Uncharted, it started what year?
2013.
2013. And what was the main goal with starting Uncharted?
Make money.
It really came down to diversifying Berkeleyside.
Yeah, Berkeleyside makes money three ways. Advertising remains the most important to us. Membership, we encourage our readers to become members. We don't force people to pay for the news, but we allow people to pay for the news. And that's growing very, very strongly. And the third is events. And the core of that is our annual Ideas Festival, Uncharted. Making money, diversifying our revenues, and doing something that was great, that really celebrated this part of the world as incredible crucible for interesting ideas, a sort of magnet for thinking. That seemed a natural thing.
I'm curious on the paid membership for Berkeleyside. You said that's growing, right?
Very strongly, up 62% this year, actually.
Wow. Wow. Congratulations. Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed right now in this environment with the fake news and a lot of different extreme like news outlets, to where a lot of people are starting to realize, hey, I am willing to pay a little bit of money for legit journalism
Mm-hmm.
and good solid news, and not something just random someone made up and just for political purposes. So you see that on your end with people paying for membership then.
Yeah. Well, people have always paid for the news. The phenomenon of people thinking, oh, I can get all the news for free is a relatively recent one. I was writing very actively through the 90s and the early 2000s when there was a lot of talk about information wants to be free, and all of that sort of notion, Electronic Frontier Foundation, sort of libertarian notions of what information flows should be like. And I'm very supportive of a lot of those notions, but doing real journalism does cost money. It's always cost money. And it's always been very hard to find ways to support that. For many, many years, when you're talking about sort of metropolitan newspapers, department stores and auto dealers and things like that were what paid for the news. I mean, people subscribed to the newspaper, but the real money was in advertising. That money, most of that money has vanished. A lot of the paying subscribers have vanished as well. And traditional, what they're called legacy news organizations are under enormous pressures because of the availability of information on the internet that people can access easily. We took the strategy, and this is actually a kind of very deep philosophy for us, that we wanted our news to be accessible to everyone in our community. We didn't want to be a site where the news and access to the news was the province purely of, in sort of cliched Berkeley terms, the people that lived in the hills, not the people that lived in the flats, which is a kind of code for an economic divide. Not necessarily always true, but loosely, sort of roughly right. We wanted everyone to access the news. If you're a homeless person in Berkeley, why should you not have access to what's happening in the city council or what's happening with development? We felt that was incredibly important. So we don't have a paywall. We don't make people pay for the news. The choice instead is to encourage people, if they're able, to pay for the news. And right now we have about 1,500 people are members. I think the average is they give $73 a year. Most people give $5 a month. Some people give more. And as I say, that's growing very strongly.
That's great. That's very similar to that website Patreon, where a lot of people are jumping onto it, but I think Patreon, you provide additional content for that, right?
Well, what Patreon is doing is allowing something like our membership program to anyone. So you could create a Patreon for your podcast, and people that want to support the podcast could give to your Patreon. A lot of people do bonus segments for Patreon supporters or things like that. So that's really just a platform to enable something like our membership campaign. We want to talk about the festival, which is coming up around the corner, but just kind of briefly, this notion of encouraging people, if they like your news provision, to support you. There's a very interesting news website in Hawaii called Civil Beat, which was founded maybe 4 or 5 years ago by Pierre Omidyar, the eBay founding billionaire. So they've got plenty of backing. That's not a problem for them. But, Pierre and the people who created Civil Beat wanted it to stand on its own 2 feet. When Civil Beat started, it was, if you want to read us, you should subscribe. You can read, 2 stories for free, but after that you have to pay. And it was a disaster. Not many people want to do that. About a year ago, they switched their business model to something like ours. We're free. Anybody can read Civil Beat. But if you think we're doing important work, do support us. Their readership, unsurprisingly, has soared because you don't have to pay to get it. What did surprise them, but doesn't surprise me, is their revenue has also soared. Many, many more people are now paying for Civil Beat, even though you don't need to pay for Civil Beat, because they have access to it and they think these people are doing great work. I want to support that. And previously, that paywall prevented them from understanding, hey, there are people doing really good journalism here. We should support that.
Very interesting. It's very neat.
Yeah.
So Uncharted this year is October 5th, October 6th. Where's it going to be located?
Again, at the Freight and Salvage and Berkeley Rep, which is on Addison Street in downtown Berkeley. And we go from 9 to 5.
9 to 5 each day.
Mm-hmm.
And then where can people buy tickets for this?
BerkeleyIdeas.com. Or if you Google Berkeley Uncharted, I'm sure you can find that. But BerkeleyIdeas.com, you can get all the information.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the speakers that are going to be there. Who are you most excited to see?
Well, that's kind of like asking who's your favorite kid. And most
most
days I cannot answer that question. No, I mean, there really is a lot in this program, as there have been, each year. But I think if I were to name a couple of the people that I'm personally really interested in, I would probably start with Mona Sharon, who is... she lives in Washington. She's a Washington pundit and a conservative woman. She's a columnist, and she made real headlines earlier this year, when she was booed during her panel discussion about the Me Too movement at CPAC, which is the conservative annual gathering in D.C. She then wrote a New York Times op-ed about what it was like to be booed and essentially escorted out. And I remember it...
They had to escort her out.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't...
For her own safety.
Right,
Wow.
Right. So, but the thing about it was that she had a conversation with... she was on The Daily and the New York Times podcast a couple of days later. And I remember so vividly, I listened to it and I slacked Lance and I was like, did you listen to The Daily today? And he was like, I heard it. And he said she would be great. And I was like, I've already called, put a call in to see if she would come and talk. And the reason why is that her perspective about essentially saying to other conservative women, if we're going to talk about Me Too and be critical, we need to also talk about our president, and we need to talk about the behavior that's, there. So she was really delightful. I spoke with her people. She emailed right away and said I would be happy to come. So I'm really interested in what she has to say. I think there's room, I believe very sincerely that there's room in this conversation about feminism, about Me Too, from another perspective, a conservative woman's perspective.
That is very interesting, yeah. And that would be a very good speaker to listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a speaker, Lance, that you're looking forward to hearing?
Absolutely. There are a lot I'm looking forward to hearing. I'll start with a caution. I think every year, my expectation of who's going to, absolutely knock people out and this is going to be amazing, has been totally off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the people I thought would be great have been great. But there's always someone, a kind of sleeper, who, this is going to be good. I think, people will enjoy this. And it just is a complete knockout. And, people leave and say, I was really interested in hearing X, but my God, that woman you had yesterday morning who I'd never heard of, that was really the highlight for me. So I fully expect that the absolute top highlight's going to be somebody. I'm not anticipating to be that. That said, what am I most interested in? There's a conversation that Helena organized. Daniel Smith from ESPN, former editor of Vibe, with Kevin Smokler talking about how hip hop became America. I think that's going to be great. It's also, my strength in terms of knowledge is, long tomes with footnotes and things like that. So that's not an area where I have much expertise. So I'm really interested to hear that. It's also, it's incredibly important to know this is a festival. So, Helena mentioned Mona Charen and kind of a conservative woman talking about feminism and how to be a rebel conservative. We've got Bonnie Jenkins, who was an ambassador under President Obama, talking about all the global problems we're neglecting at the moment that people aren't thinking about that yet are really important. But we also do a lot of things that I think are fun, and that's important. That's the whole point of a festival. So I'm excited about, on Saturday morning at our festival, Cal Peternell, who was for many years the executive chef at Chez Panisse, he's going to kind of lead a trip around the corner to the farmers market in Berkeley, show people how he picks the most interesting things at the farmers market, which produce, he rejects because that's not, those, pluots aren't looking so great today or whatever it might
That'd
be.
be a lot of fun.
That's going to be a lot of fun. But then he's
restaurants.
going to come back with them and he's going to take the stuff he bought with them then and create something with that. Kind of his demonstration with what I just bought, and let's invent this together. I think that's going to be tons of fun.
What day is that?
That's on Saturday morning. So I think that's going to be great. On Friday morning, we have, again, kind of one of these breakout things. We have what we're calling the Curious Cannabis Salon. Because of the laws, nobody's going to be able to ingest or use cannabis, but we have 4 amazing kind of cannabis entrepreneurs who are going to kind of talking about this new world of kind of infusions and edibles and different things using CBD and I think that's going to be really interesting for people. I mean, for a lot of, I think our audience in particular, there's not a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, I had the Berkeley Patients Group here on the podcast several months ago, and they broke down all the various components of let's say, marijuana. It's like 23 components. Everyone knows THC, CBD as the top 2. But yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, so I think people will be very interested in that. We have a party on Friday night with great food and drink and live music. So, we want it to be not, I'm going to sit here and listen to things and that's important. And, I'm going to learn a lot of stuff. There's that. But there's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is that on our Instagram page, which is at Uncharted Ideas, and also through our hashtag, which is Berkeley Ideas, we've, I think, did a pretty good job of sort of explaining who's coming, who they are, in most cases who they're going to talk to. And it's a fun way just to go to Instagram and take a look at all of the different people and the bios that we've provided there. In addition, it's on the website as well. But that's kind of a fun way because you get to see the picture and, get a little bit of information on who they are and what they're doing that's likely to be of interest.
Now, with certain recent events, do you have any concern with conservative speakers coming to Berkeley?
We don't have trolls. We don't have people, we would never in a million years, invite a Milo Yiannopoulos, a Steve Bannon. I have zero interest in giving a platform to people who are going to spew hate and division. That's not what this is about. It's, in fact, exactly the opposite of what it's about. People will get upset by some of the things Mona Charen says. I have no doubt whatsoever. In other amazing women, we have Zara Bilou, who runs the Bay Area branch of the Council for American Islamic Relations, CAIR. Zara's going to upset some people too. She's very outspoken on Palestinian issues, for example, and that's not to everyone's taste. That's fine. But these are serious people making a reasoned contribution to debate. They are not trying to, sow division and hatred, you know, I was astounded that the New Yorker invited Steve Bannon. I mean, that's just such an incredible misjudgment on their part. He has no interest in furthering debate on, you know, let's understand the issues. That's not
Yeah,
what
you
he's
can
about.
see their website and just
Yeah, you know that. So, you know, the New Yorker, terrible misjudgment. They pulled the invitation quite rightly. You know, this is not somebody who deserves a hearing. And you know, so I think we're happy to have and we encourage difference of perspective, but we want people who are actually seriously engaged with the issues,
Right.
not just trolling.
hmm Now, how do you go about finding speakers? Because I would imagine finding these high caliber speakers every single year would be very difficult for a 2-day festival.
No, it's not. I mean, we're reading, listening, watching, attending throughout the year. And oftentimes it's a matter of having too many speakers and having to figure out, oh, goodness, how are we going to, reduce the program, given our time restraints. But no, I think, Lance is a journalist, right? So he's consuming news. I'm a publicist. I'm consuming news. So it's actually not hard. But I do think that one of the things that's unique about the way we work is that it's not simply a matter of, this person is great on this particular topic, but it's what are the topics that we want to have and the conversations that we want to have, and then who are the right people to have those conversations. One, because they will just enjoy it, but two, sometimes they just come at an issue from an opposite perspective, and that's where I think the real magic can often happen in these conversations. So yeah, so we literally reading, listening, attending. We travel in different circles. Sometimes we meet people out and about. Lance has a great story of last year. The person who was driving his cab in Phoenix
Yeah.
came and talked about being a refugee from Sudan.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's this year, one of the conversations we're having is with Miriam Warren from Yelp and a friend of hers by the name of Jamel Oser Sweat, who, it's kind of a funny story, but the bottom line is when we move classes, a lot of people who did not grow up in the middle class or the upper middle class, when you make that leap, oftentimes we don't, our friends, our families, they don't come with us. So it really transcends race, and it's really an issue of class. What do we do? How do we deal with that? I moved, let's say, to the middle class, and then my mother and my father, they're still struggling, my friends. So this conversation came about because Miriam and I both serve on the board of Reading Partners. And she was the person that was going to welcome me to the board. And we spent the better part of an hour just talking about a number of things. And then she mentioned this friend of hers who was a homeless person. When he was growing up, he was homeless. And now he's the executive director of the organization that helped he and his family. He went to NYU, is now a lawyer in New York City. And so I thought, wow, I came back to Lance and said, hey, this sounds like a great conversation. And so, again, just so happened that she and I were having coffee one day to talk about Reading Partners.
And I'd actually give a slightly different answer to Helena, because I think it is hard. Helena said it isn't hard. We are reading and listening and talking to a lot of different people and soliciting ideas, and we're very open. We try and have as open a process as we can. But it is hard doing the right kind of curation. It would be very easy to pick the usual suspects. There's a circuit of people who are talking about, topic A or topic B, and they appear at all the usual places. Aspen Ideas Festival, New Yorker Festival, on and on and on, and it goes. They're on the circuit. What we try really hard to do is get outside that circuit, and I think this is why it's not easy. We're almost setting high hurdles for ourselves by trying to identify the people you probably haven't heard of, and I think we're getting a good track record for this, but we're pretty confident that if you come to Uncharted, you'll be able to say, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, or 3 years' time, oh, everybody's talking about, I heard her back when. I mean, last year, for example, we had Rick Wilson talking. The title of the session was Everything Trump Touches Dies. Top of the bestseller list in the New York Times right now. Well, below the Bob Woodward book, but still right near the top. Rick Wilson's book, Everything Trump Touches Dies. Now Rick Wilson is ubiquitous on cable TV and everything, and I think that's great for Rick because he's hilarious and an incisive commentator and deserves a hearing. You know, the people who were at our Saturday last year, you know, had Rick before Rick was everywhere, and you know, so we're trying to do the unobvious thing.
Now, with attendance in the festival growing and the number of speakers you have access to, is there any discussion about possibly expanding to a 3-day festival?
Not now.
Not yet. I don't think there's any formula for these things. You know, it's not like there's an algorithm we can plug things into and that will give us an ideal result. You know, we work on, you know, our days are Friday and Saturday. Some people have said, why don't you do the weekend, Saturday and Sunday? And kind of our thinking is, well, particularly for people with families, if you take the whole weekend, that's a disincentive. And people say, oh, but people at work, it's hard for them to come on Friday. And so there's no perfect answer. 2 days seems right for us for the stage of where we are now. And, you know, we're kind of happy with the scale. Always want to sell more tickets, no question about that. But the sort of scale, the timing, the schedule, it works pretty well. That may well evolve over time, but no rush to change that part of it.
So I'm glad to see a festival like this, because when I met you, Helena, last year, I hadn't heard of anything local or a festival like this before, right?
Yeah.
And I think these festivals are very important because just the exchanging of ideas, and that's what we discussed on the podcast last year, and how important it is to be able to exchange ideas, even ideas that you do not agree with, because it opens up that dialogue for us as a society and as human beings to keep evolving forward. I mean, I feel like right now there's at least in some of the media, you see a big divide. It's my way or the highway, right? And people get very tribal with their ideas of what they believe in without really understanding or taking a look at their own ideas and saying, hey, if someone argued against my idea, do I have a great comeback for it, a valid comeback for it? Am I able to articulate my belief, my idea, and explain to others why I feel I'm right? And so this is great because people are able to go there and experience various speakers, listen to different ideas. Now, are there separate dialogues afterwards to where a lot of the audience can even have dialogue amongst themselves?
No, I mean, but one of the things I think you'll find about Uncharted that's different, and I think Lear Garchek in the Chronicle noted this last year, is that there's a real sense of community before and during and even after the festival. So people gather and there's great food, I must say. And there's, I forget exactly the way she put it, but she said it was sort of like a collegiate sort of atmosphere. And so I think that there's this natural engagement and community that comes from not necessarily like-minded people in terms of, you know, all of their political ideas, but people who are saying, look, there's a lot going on. I'm a little overwhelmed by just reading the headlines. I'm interested in coming and listening and hearing two people talk about an issue that I'm, you know, interested in, or maybe didn't even realize that I was interested in. And so there's a sort of an organic community and sense of community and engagement that just happens from being at the festival.
Yeah, and we do try and give lots of space for what you're talking about, in that, you know, there are coffee breaks. We encourage the speakers to be available and around, and I can hardly think of any occasion when, you know, somebody had a really interesting chat on stage and then the speaker vanished. So people say, "Oh, I really wanted to talk to X. He was fascinating, and I couldn't find him." If you want to get engaged with the people we have on stage, it's easy to do. They're around the coffee breaks. They come to the party, lunch. Some people go to the various places in downtown Berkeley. There's a lot of choice, but we also offer, if you want, sort of lunch boxes that people can buy for $16.
Town
and
kitchen.
and the people who buy the box lunches can sit around and talk with other people who are at the festival and compare notes. And we're very interested in getting that informal interaction as well as the kind of more formal experience of people on stage. And every session we have time for questions. It's intended to be interactive.
Yeah, I would imagine with some of the topics that can get really, really heavy, you would have a lot of people that have questions, want to meet the speakers, and want to dive in a little bit more into it, especially if they had a certain specific idea of a topic and then it got changed from a speaker.
Well, that's if that happens, that's great. I think that's really the intention is, for people's, mind to explode, by this experience, to kind of walk away and say, I never thought of it that way. That's really the intention.
Now, is this festival all ages?
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason why I ask is because in today's political environment, and I use an example where growing up in middle school, none of my friends, no one spoke of politics. We just didn't care growing up, right? Nowadays, you talk to even elementary, middle school kids, they know everything going on with politics. Now, part of it, I think, is very easy access to the internet, and so they're able to see a lot more and consume a lot more content, but they can also consume a lot of other content, not politics. Yet it's amazing to see young people with really strong opinions on a variety of different political topics. So that's why I wanted to ask if it was all ages, because I would imagine a lot of even students, young kids, would want to attend some of these festivals and hear the speakers.
Well, if people go to berkeleyideas.com, and they're a young kid or a student, they'll probably look at the price and say, ouch, that's not for me. But get in touch with me, Lance at berkeleyside.com. We do have heavily discounted tickets. We want people to come if they're interested. We'll make it possible. And I know we've had people, some of our fans who come a lot have said, oh, I'm going to bring my middle schooler this year. Not a lot of that, but some of it. In the program, interestingly, this year we have two very young people. There's Eva Lewis, who was one of the leaders of the fight against gun violence in Chicago, the city she's from. She's going to be talking about that. And
Chicago's suffering through a lot of gun violence right now.
Terrible. And Eva and a number of other young people have really been at the forefront of, fighting against this and, trying to make people recognize this kind of scale of the issue and the importance of it. And then right after Eva's conversation, another young person, younger than Eva, even 16 years old, Madison Yearsley, is going to perform a song that she wrote about gun violence. And Madison is here because we coincide this year with Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. And Madison and 11 other kids are going to be performing at Hardly Strictly on Sunday songs they wrote about gun violence. And so we have one of them who's going to be there. So really interested in getting different ages perspective as well as participation in our audience for sure.
Now, have either of you listened to a past speaker and just been so wowed at what they said that it changed some preconceived notions you might have had?
Changed? No. Broadened, enlightened? Yes. What's coming to mind is the conversation that Lance actually had last year with Heather Bucci. an economist in D.C. The conversation was about, remind me,
kind of the economics of work-life balance.
Which on its face sounds vague and, you're not quite sure. But I remember sitting and listening to the conversation and buying the book afterwards, the author's book, because this conversation about issues that I don't necessarily read about often were so interesting, and it was at a level that I felt like I could understand, and I wanted to learn more. So I think about every time I see her on Twitter now, I'm always remembering how much I enjoyed that conversation. I think also Joan C. Williams, who I know you had on the program, her conversation last year about class cluelessness, I think it was it just blew me away.
When she was on the podcast and she was breaking down her recent book, The White Working Class, and how she broke it down, I think she hit it right on the nail with exactly it helped you understand why Trump got elected.
Yeah, she has a gift at, I think, making the complex clear in that regard, for sure.
I'll give you an example that isn't so much changing minds as certainly exciting people. 2 years ago, we had an astrophysicist, Alex Filipenko, and Alex talked about solar eclipses. And the reason Alex was talking about it 2 years ago is because, so this is in 2016, in 2017 in August, there was a total solar eclipse not far from here. If you went to Oregon or a number of other states, you could see it. I personally know a couple of dozen people who were in the audience for Alex who instantly, after hearing him, and boy, he's an incredibly exciting, enthusiastic, funny, speaker, and so passionate about things. They went out and instantly kind of booked their trip to somewhere where they could see totality, including, my wife and I, we went, and Alex was completely right. This is, if any of your listeners have never seen and totality is important. If you saw a partial solar eclipse, forget about it. That's interesting. It's not remarkable. If they haven't seen a total solar eclipse, this is a life-changing experience. It is the definition of awe-inspiring. And I think the next one is in a few years, that's in North America, is in a few years. If you go to, you'll have to go to Texas, I think. Book your flights now. This is...
Did you go up to Oregon?
Yeah.
To see it?
Because it was Monday morning, we had a great weekend in Portland, did all sorts of, going to Portland kind of things. And then early Monday morning, we drove, because Portland wasn't in totality. You had to go a little bit south of Portland. So we drove an hour south of Portland, found a field, and we stood in the field and we watched it. And honestly, you think, why is this something that you're enthusing about? Well, Alex convinced me that this mattered, and he was absolutely right.
Well, I can only imagine, because I didn't go up to Oregon to see it, but I just saw it online. And that was
not the same
exactly
thing. You have to see it in person. When I was growing up, I was a nerd, and I was into looking through telescopes, and I knew all about solar eclipses and all that. But honestly, experiencing a black hole in the middle of the sky, which is what happens when totality occurs, there is the blackest disk you've ever seen in your life in the middle of the sky, and you see the solar corona and all that sort of stuff. It is jaw-dropping. It is something everyone has to experience at least once in their lifetime.
Yeah, like I said, I just saw it online, and it was incredible to watch it there. So I can only imagine being there in person, and then just seeing everything black out and then come back. Yeah, that's got to be.
There's a great photo
experience.
of Lance and Tracy on I think your Instagram page.
Yeah.
Which is fun
wearing
to see.
our solar
glasses
and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's so anyway. That didn't change my mind about something, but it altered my perception, and it convinced me, you got to go. And boy, was he right.
Do you have another astrophysicist this year?
We don't have an astrophysicist. We do have two things that I can't tell you about yet because they have been confirmed. Berkeley Lab, the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Every year they hold what they call a science slam competition. The postgraduate researchers who are at the lab compete they have 3 minutes to describe their research work. And it's a competition. And the two winners of the Science Slam, which I think is being held beginning of next week, we'll have the two winners at Uncharted, one on Friday, one on Saturday. And so they'll do their 3-minute slam. So I have no idea what it's going to be about. I have no idea who's going to do it, but I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
That's great.
That's awesome. So how do we get the youth more involved into these exchange of ideas? I mean, this is great that you're putting this together, but how can we get the youth more involved, because they will eventually be the future of our country?
Well, I think one is inviting them to be part of the program, which we have and will continue to do. And I think, as Lance said, if there are youth, you go to the website and you see the cost, and if it's not something that you or your family are able to do, we're saying reach out to us and let us know that there are tickets that we've made available, for people who want to come and, may not be able to come because of the ticket price.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
the other thing is social media. I mean, we are trying hard to engage with the people who are coming to Uncharted this year. If you follow the hashtag Berkeley Ideas, you get a pretty good sense of, who's out there, who's coming, what they're writing about, what they're engaging, disrupting. So that's one way to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And I think the more that we do get people to come and hear, and Eva Lewis and others, the more that people are going to go out and sort of think about, even at, 17, 18 years old, hey, an Ideas Festival is something that I'd be interested in saving my money for or working to be able to attend. So I think word of mouth from the people who come this year is going to be important. And, doing conversations like this, I'm sure you have a diverse audience in terms of, age and occupation and whatnot. So hopefully this is an opportunity for us to reach them and their parents and their friends and others. So
yeah, I think, Marc, youth are an incredibly important audience, but there's also an important audience. Most people, I mean, generalizations are always terrible, but I think this is probably true. Most people live their life comparatively with blinders on. They're often particularly successful people. They're very focused. They're going to work at, Google or Twitter or Salesforce or Facebook or Pandora or wherever. And they are dedicated to their work and they do it incredibly well and all that. Part of what Uncharted is about is reaching some of those people and saying, actually, there is a whole world out there beyond, what you're seeing in your screen every day, and the lines of code or the meetings you have about the latest project or whatever it may be. Take a day or two and be confronted with all sorts of things that you're not thinking about. You spend hundreds and hundreds of days, thousands and thousands of hours every year immersed in your world, whether it's selling real estate or doing code or marketing something or who knows what. That's what you spend an enormous percentage of your waking hours doing. Here's a little opportunity to slip away from that and encounter an extraordinary set of new worlds to kind of provoke you and let you think about different things. And it's my contention that helps you do the things you do better by having that kind of release and that new experience and that new perspective. So, I think there are a whole bunch of different audiences for whom this is an important experience.
Well, I think that's also one of the best benefits of traveling, right?
Completely.
Same thing. When you
Completely.
travel, you're exposed to so many different people, cultures, and especially if you travel outside of your country and just seeing or understanding how they even look at us as a country, right? Gives you a lot more perspective and it broadens your mind on what's really out there and how the actual world works.
Yeah, I think it should do. We all know, however, that for too many people, travel means, going to, maybe in some very exotic location, but going to a resort where the gates are closed and your
Yeah.
experience is mediated and controlled and sanitized, and you're actually not experience much difference at all. So, you can think of Berkeleyside's Uncharted Festival as, we're not the gated resort. This is very much plunging into the real world and learning to cope with that real world. And, that's the experience we want people to have.
Have you ever thought about taking Uncharted on the road?
Would love to do it. Need to find a way to make that possible.
Like a touring bus with all the speakers?
Yeah, not sure about a bus. I'm not a bus. I mean, I'm a number 79 AC Transit bus person, but I'm not a let's go on a long distance bus person. Yeah.
So what about a short distance? Maybe another location in the Bay Area, South Bay, something like that?
Maybe.
Yeah, there were a couple of people I was speaking to last year who said you really need to do this on the peninsula because the people I was just talking about at particularly technology companies, they have access to a gazillion technology conferences, technology discussions, and all that. What they don't have so much is somebody forcing them out of that comfort zone. And this person was saying, you need this more in Palo Alto than you do in Berkeley. And I found that resonated. If there's a way for us to do it, that would be great.
Yeah, on one of the highest and best real estate shows that I do, we were talking about Sam, was it Measure 3 for the
Regional Measure 3?
Regional Measure 3 for the bridges and raising the tolls, and we were discussing who are this increase in tolls, who will really be affected by these tolls. And you have a lot of people here in the Bay Area voting on it, but many people along the peninsula, they're not crossing the bridges every single day. And you have a lot of people from the North Bay, Solano County, all the way up to Sacramento that are commuting all the way down. They're crossing Carquinez Bridge, crossing the Bay Bridge or San Rafael Bridge. And so they're paying 1 or 2 tolls sometimes to come here and work. And same thing living in the East Bay. If you have to commute over the bridge, you're paying more than what someone on the peninsula would be paying for commute time or commuting, right? And yet the income difference from the peninsula to the East Bay and the North Bay is completely just night and day. Yeah, so that was something that we were discussing, and so that would be great to do something on the peninsula where you can,
or as you say, the South Bay equally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of places, maybe Sacramento. We need to find a way to make that business work.
Yeah. So I'm excited for this Uncharted Festival.
You gonna come?
Yes.
Yay.
Yes. I'm gonna be buying tickets, and I'm trying to get a few other people to go. I wanted to go last year, but I just couldn't. But this year, that's definitely the plan. So I'll be there.
We look forward to
Good.
seeing you.
Yeah.
So Lance, Helena, thanks for being on the podcast. Again, the website berkeleyside.com and then berkeleyideas.com. Where they can buy tickets.
BerkeleyIdeas.com. Yeah.
Perfect. And then they can also use the hashtag Berkeley Ideas, get previews, and also see past photos.
Right.
Maybe videos. Too,
Right. And they can search on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Yeah. If you go to berkeleyside.com, if you click the podcast part, I mean, those podcasts are mostly previous conversations from Uncharted, and you can get a sense of that if you want to sample before you buy. That would be a nice way to do it.
Is there a way
Awesome.
to rewatch speakers from this year if we can't make it?
We do record audio for everything. We're audio, not video oriented. We did the first few years we did video, and we ended up with terabytes of video that we had no idea what to do with. That's not our skill. Since then, we've focused on podcasts. We work with a fantastic woman, ex-KQED producer, who helps us package them into lovely sort of 30-minute podcasts, and so that's our focus. If you want to kind of catch up, we don't turn it around all that quickly because we're busy doing the news, but we're committed to that as a way to distribute some of the content.
Audio is the way to go too, because
it's
video
so much
views,
more portable.
Yeah, in video views, you lose half the people in the first 3 seconds anyway.
Well, I think the other thing is, unless you're going to really go for high production,
Quality,
so multiple cameras, and doing the necessary editing afterwards, videoing two people talking on stage kind of looks like something happening at the back of a high school auditorium. It's incredibly unappealing. Audio doesn't have any of those constraints. It's much lighter weight, more nimble. So I think it's a better way to experience things.
Yeah, and podcasting expected to quadruple in the next 10 years.
I'm all about the pod.
Yeah. Well, thank you too
Thank you
for
for
being on
having
the
us.
podcast.
Thanks,
and
appreciate it.
good luck with the festival. I'll see you there, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. We
Fantastic.
appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.